You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
The Apothecaries Hall is one of the most interesting of the extant guild halls in London. This is because it is the oldest extant guild hall. What we see here was built in 1672, and it had to be rebuilt after the Great Fire of London. Parts of the building, however, do go back into the 13th century. These bits of the building were originally owned by the Dominican Priory of Blackfriars. After the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII, it was sold on and called Cobham House and subsequently purchased by the Apothecaries Guild when the Apothecaries Guild split from the Grocers Guild. As the name indicates, the Worshipful Society of the Apothecaries were a specific guild that were set up to sell medicaments and spices. This was eventually deemed to be different from the Grocers Guild, who sold spices generally. What grocers here doesn't mean is groceries how we think of it, but groceries is anything that would be sold in gross, so in weights and measurements. In the medieval period, there was no real differentiation between spices that were sold for cooking and spices that were sold for medicine, in that the majority of people who would be buying them were probably making their own medicaments at home. You would see this in the medieval period with the popularity of books such as the Trotula, which would talk housewives through how to make cough syrup, for example, or anything to do with generalized fevers. They would know to get their spices from the Grocers Guild, and then they would make their own medicines at Hall. The apothecaries in the 17th century break off because the understanding of medicine has moved on. Medicine is now seen as something that is more specifically professional. You would want to get professional people to tell you these are the medicinal spices and to make up medicines for you more specifically. So it indicates a breaking away or an understanding of how medicine is no longer something to be done in the hall or in the home, and it is something that you want to get a professional person to do. The guilds writ large and the guild halls are a very important part of London history because, in many ways, they are a part of why London was important at all whatsoever. Guilds are something in between a kind of a union and a protection racket. They make sure that the members of the guilds, so that's anyone who does that particular trade, so sells spices, sells medicines, is a fishmonger, is a wax chandler, or somebody who makes candles. What they do is make sure that these people get paid what they see to be an appropriate amount for their specialized work. It's very difficult to become a member of a guild, however, and there are only a few ways in. One way is to be born into a family of guild members. So if your father is a member of a guild and you are his son, you would be allowed into the guild automatically once you were already trained. You could also become an apprentice, which is to say that you would work for free or sometimes pay in order to work, usually for a period of 7 years. Once you complete this training, then you would be allowed to join the guild. The other way in is to simply pay a large amount of money. And this essentially it pays your admission. Everybody knows that these are very well-desired jobs. So if you pay enough money, people will say, all right, that's fine, you're let in. You can also be invited into the guild, and this is an incredibly common thing now, in that the guilds are all still extant, but they function more as clubs. So, for example, oftentimes popular entertainers or members of the royalty or prime ministers will be allowed to join particular guilds now. However, these were extraordinarily powerful people in the early modern period and in the medieval period because they were worth quite a lot of money. Essentially, all London mayors had come from various guilds, and these were the equivalent of millionaires now. They owned the majority of property in the city, and they controlled most politics in the city. So, to look at any particular guild hall is to understand a part of pre-modern London. These were groups of extraordinarily wealthy and powerful people who controlled incredibly important trades. They controlled the city, and they built amazing halls like the Apothecaries Hall in order to hang out with each other, do business, and make sure everyone understood how important they were.